Did How to Train Your Dragon solve live-action remakes? Hey, brother! Boy, howdy, you guys. I just saw the new live-action How to Train Your Dragon with the family, and spoiler alert, I loved it. But I will also say that that reaction came a bit as a pleasant surprise. As the trailers were coming out, I was really excited to see that scenes like Toothless and Hiccup coming together for the first time were basically shot for shot for the original iconic scene. On the one hand, that's awesome. It's one of, if not the most iconic moments in the entire franchise. That one's just got to be done just right. Then on the other hand, we also have to ask the question, is the whole movie going to be like that? Like, if it's exactly the same, what's the point?
You just gestured to all of me.
Well, the answer to that question is, it was exactly the same. And today I'm going to argue why I believe it's all the better for it. Okay, live-action remakes feel a bit like a dime a dozen at this point. Sometimes they go off, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether these remakes are trying to be bold reinterpretations or just trying to squeeze a few more dollars out of nostalgia.
Nostalgia. You aren't supposed to be here yet. You still have about 10 years, 2 graduations, and a best friend's wedding before you're invited, but I will keep you in the loop, I promise.
For example, I don't know many people who actively prefer the live-action Lion King to the original. I mean, certainly to each their own, but I think it's safe to say that this isn't the universal opinion. However, the Lion King live action did still pull in a whopping $1.657 billion at the box office, so I don't think that the executives down at Disney are terribly concerned over the 52% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. This imbalance, though, between the box office and the reviews feeds the driving sentiment behind these ventures that certainly feels a bit like each new live-action reboot is, if nothing else, just a cash grab. Then as fans, we may feel a little bit mixed because we're stoked to have that nostalgia itch scratched, but also may leave the theaters feeling a little bit more empty than expected, a little bit less sure each time a new film hits theaters. Do these live-action remakes justify their own existence?
Boy, where's your boss? Help me out here. Where's your boss? If I was going to talk to myself, I could have just stayed in the lab.
On the flip side, I exited the theater this past weekend after taking in 1 hour and 56 glorious minutes of faith-restoring live-action action. So I've spent the last several days contemplating the experience, namely because How to Train Your Dragon deviated about 3 inches from the original story. A risky move, if you ask me, when people already adore the original. Let's all be a little bit honest with ourselves, because remakes are stuck in a lose-lose scenario. Like, keep it the same, and people ask why you even bothered. But change anything, and you've ruined their childhood. How dare you?
Oh, how did you break that?
So how did How to Train Your Dragon pull it off? Why does it work? Well, sentiment number 1. It didn't feel like some kind of hollow copy. Live-action How to Train Your Dragon managed to capture the tone of the source material. The bond between Hiccup and Toothless is great. This coming-of-age tale, the struggle of trying to find yourself without trying to one-up the original. Like, for example, you don't make a well-seasoned meal better by adding more seasoning. Then if we compare that to the Lion King live action, which, to be fair, also followed its animated counterpart very closely, so tick in that department. But it lost so much of its spirit in the format. The style guide, the usage of photorealistic animals made it really difficult for the animals to do what the animated classic absolutely thrived on: emoting. Because that is what animation as a format thrives on, when it allows us to add a layer of caricature to the subjects. Simba being terrified at the upcoming stampede, or being disgusted by slimy bugs, Scar's sly little looks, or Zazu's uppity persona. None of this translates to photorealism, so the end result is something similar to a nature documentary with some musical numbers thrown in for good measure. Then How to Train Your Dragon took the risk and depicted all of the dragons exactly as we know them in the original feature. They didn't turn Toothless into some terrifying, hyper-realistic dragon. He looks exactly like Toothless, down to the gummy, awkward smile. This is another area where I think that something like the live-action Beauty and the Beast took kind of a strange turn into the uncanny valley, which, by the way, is a real term. It examines the space between realism and cartoonification, where things are neither and worse for it. Beauty and the Beast, by comparison, made the decision to take some of the most beloved characters, Cogsworth, Lumiere, Mrs. Potts, and Chip, and decided to make them into what looked like, for all intents and purposes, a real clock, candelabra, and tea set. They looked like antique props from a museum display, rigid, soulless. You could almost hear the curator saying, "Please do not touch." And it makes them less endearing, no matter how voiced by Ewan McGregor they may be.
Hello there.
Hey, buddy. Y'all, we need to take a brief pause right there to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Listen, if you were to ask anyone who knows me personally, they'd be able to tell you that mental health is something that I put a lot of emphasis on, not just on all of my various platforms, but also in everyday conversation. And it's because I know the stigma that I personally held in my own head before properly being exposed to the benefits, and I'm always working hard to lower that for others as well. Because the truth is, it is completely normal to have struggles, to feel doubt or insecurity. I promise, we all experience it one way or another, but real strength and growth comes from opening up about those struggles. And when you do something about it, not only will you personally benefit, but so will the other people in your life. I have personally learned so much from therapy, things like setting boundaries and positive coping skills. It's not always major trauma that we need help with. It can be single syllable words that we could use more. Basically, it is okay to say no. And if you're anything like me, you're busy. But not to worry, you can join a session with a licensed therapist with just the click of a button. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse range of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/super. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/super. Link is in the description down below. This is where I think How to Train Your Dragon used the live action not just as a new style guide, but as a proper format. It's hard to think of it like this, but consider the following. There's Best Animated Feature at the Oscars because animation is really its own form of art. But largely everything else is just live action because that's what movies with actors in it are. But when what you're doing is making a live action version of a formerly animated film, I would argue that the live action format becomes a medium in a whole new way. This is again where How to Train Your Dragon excels. It's using the format exactly right, letting the landscapes, mountainscapes feel real and add depth. There is tangible weight to things. When Hiccup and Toothless have their first successful training flight, the stakes feel low in an animated movie because you know they aren't real. But when Mason Thames is on his back and they are zipping through real landscapes with actual rocks? I don't know how much of it is real, but I know they filmed a lot of it in Northern Ireland to capitalize on the beauty of the area and nailed it. Either way, Hiccup's success here feels more real and earned because as a real person, the risk feels way higher. So from there, if I can draw a comparison, it might be in the same way that there are also Broadway versions of animated classics as well, for both The Lion King and Aladdin. I've seen both, and those performances do a spectacular job showcasing the platform that it is, the stage. It's seeing what the talented actors are capable of doing using their medium. When you leave The Lion King on Broadway, you think, wow, that was one of the coolest things I have ever seen. Nobody hates that there's a Broadway version of it. That's because Broadway celebrates reinvention. Nobody complains that Zazu is clearly a puppet with a guy in a blue suit standing behind him, or that the lions are clearly just people with lion masks on top of their head. It's supposed to be different, but film remakes, they're held up to the original like it's gospel, and if it's not an exact match, it's a failure. To complete the argument, in this case, I think How to Train Your Dragon live action is to its original in the same way that Lion King on Broadway is to its own original classic. That's going to bring me to my final point, the performers. The cast of How to Train Your Dragon brings a huge amount of nuance to their respective roles. In some cases, this is probably the lightning that is the hardest to catch in a bottle twice. And possibly How to Train Your Dragon benefits from having its own original director for the animated feature, returning to helm this project as well.
I decided to revisit How to Train Your Dragon because I want you to feel the thrill of flying on top of a dragon. Yeah! but also the fear that you could fall.
Or on that same token, that specifically Gerard Butler, who has already voiced Stoic the Vast in the original film, is uniquely capable of anchoring the cast by delivering an incredible performance twice.
Taught me what a Viking could do, Gobber. He could crush mountains, level forests, tame seas. Even as a boy, I knew what I was, what I had to become. Hiccup is not that boy.
But if we jump over to the live-action Aladdin for this comparison, we can look at Will Smith as Genie and acknowledge right away that this is unmistakably a tall order. It may be the hardest any live-action film has faced when it comes to taking on a specific role. Robin Williams' interpretation of the character was neatly parked in a league of its own. Because this reality lives in the back of everyone's minds, it also felt like Will Smith was being asked to fight an uphill battle with one hand tied behind his back and as the understudy to someone who has already won the championship belt. And to his credit, he doesn't try to copy Robin Williams, which would have been impossible, but instead brings his own charisma and style to the role, although I'd actually argue that they didn't even really let him go full Will Smith on it, but that's not really the problem. The problem is the role itself wasn't designed to be inherited. Robin Williams was the genie.
Quick, wish for something outrageous. Say, I want the Nile. Wish for the Nile. Try that.
His performance was the blueprint, and building something different without betraying what came before turned out to be a nearly impossible needle to thread. Compare that to Gerard Butler returning as Stoic. He's not reinventing anything. He's re-inhabiting something. There's history, continuity, authenticity. It's not an actor filling a famous pair of shoes. It's the same giant shoulders and the same oversized bear cape punching dragons with his hammers.
I'll take care of this.
That is a massive difference, and it's one of the key reasons that How to Train Your Dragon feels like it's honoring its legacy rather than shadowboxing it. So then what's the rub here? If you have a character as iconic as Genie, it just can't work?
Will that break? Will that... It broke.
Well, Genie is rather singular, but then there's a character like Gobber, Stoic's best friend and mentor / teacher to Hiccup in How to Train Your Dragon. While maybe not in league with Genie, he's a goofy character to portray due to the missing limbs and unique interchangeable prosthetics. He's a great example of a character who thrives in animation, using the medium to do things that live action shouldn't be able to pull off. No pun intended. Get it? I'm talking about things like knocking a metal tooth back into place with a fresh mug of brew and the like. And again, this is where I think How to Train Your Dragon really hits its stride, walking the line between Broadway, animation, and live action as distinct formats and finding just the right balance. Gobber, the live action character, doesn't really look real. It looks like he's wearing a big padded coat to give the character the right proportions. The interchangeable arms are goofy as heck, but you know what? They also work. Even in live action form, he just kind of looks like a cartoon character. It's wholesome and correct and feels authentic to the original story. It's not some reinvented, uncanny recreation. It's just as ridiculous as it already is. And this last argument crystallizes in the showpiece of the film, Toothless himself. It's the great Sonic debate of 2019. Do you change the character to fit the live action or mold the live action around the character?
Yeah, is that so difficult to believe?
Because you absolutely could have reinvented Toothless, made him look more like a Game of Thrones dragon, more realistic, if you will. But the design of Toothless is perfect. He defies the Lion King's determination to go full photorealistic, and the end result is that Toothless can make that adorable gummy grin. That's got that cat-like persona that's adorable and intimidating and curious and loyal all at once. How to Train Your Dragon succeeds as a live-action film because it chose to look at live action like a medium, and I personally believe that that made all the difference. Y'all, let me know what you think in the towel section down below, and also for what it's worth, I'm not here to just dunk on every live-action remake. I think Jasmine is amazing in the live-action Aladdin, Speechless is a great addition, Timon and Pumbaa were hilarious and self-aware in the live-action Lion King, and Evermore by Dan Stevens' interpretation of The Beast is one of my all-time favorite Disney songs. My goal in today's video isn't to rip other projects to shreds, it's simply to recognize that this did work, and hope that it inspires future projects to do the same. But y'all, as always, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to go back to when Jay and I were just wee little lads doing one of our first ever film reviews ever and absolutely gushing about the live action remake of Beauty and the Beast, you can do so right over here. But otherwise, until next time, bye! Also, don't forget to eat cheese.